And here we are. Hello,
It's like
John.
Mount Rushmore,
That's,
but
that's
better, more up to date.
oh, that's a good one. Yes, more up to date. I'll take that. It's good to see you, John.
Good to see you. It's been a whole week since we last convened in the virtual domain here.
A whole week, and as always, a lifetime in between. Yesterday was my birthday, and
Oh,
to
happy
be
birthday!
thank you, sir. To be honest with you, it went by so fast that I was thinking earlier this morning, like I want to do over.
Yeah, right. My my birthday is next week, and it starts off at 7 a.m. with a board meeting.
Oh goodness. Oh wow. What is the day of your birthday for all your adoring fans out there, John?
It's the 14th,
I'm gonna make a note of that because we're gonna have
Tuesday, the 14th.
a special John and Brian birthday episode
Yeah,
planned
Sagittarius.
ahead.
Sagittarius.
Sagittarius, that's right, absolutely. Oh man, well, it's wonderful to see you. It's wonderful to see all of you. Welcome to Intersections, John. One of the things that I have to confess to everyone is that last week there was a glitch. And I think we're going to have to do a do-over, speaking of which, with Jeremiah, in that it did not broadcast live on LinkedIn or Facebook
Oh,
because of that glitch.
strange.
So we are back in business, though, this week, and our first guest will be happy to know that she has the broad reach of a greater audience this week. And with that said, though, this show is about you. And we welcome you to the show. So please make sure to share with us where you're tuning in from. Share with us your questions. Share with us your comments and your thoughts. This is equal parts our guest, John and myself, as well as you. Intersections, and I'll just jump right in, is a community-driven program. It's a weekly conversational jam session, which I love the way we describe that dives deep into the intersections of technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. And every Thursday, we bring diverse personalities and worldviews together in the greater greater service of understanding and unlearning. And my co-host is definitely one of those blazing the trail and has been for quite a long time. The Economist has called him Mr. Creativity. He's just an innovator, a thought leader, one of those minds that blurs the line between the possibilities of the future and artistry, and makes it approachable by all of us, but also empowers us to be the leaders of the future. And he's certainly done that for a good while at Harvard Business School and at MIT Media Lab in Stanford. He's a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage, and he wrote the best-selling Jamming, the Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. Your host and co-founder, my friend John Kao.
Wow, Brian. Well, let me reciprocate and say that it's a pleasure to share responsibilities for Intersections with Brian because we have complementary perspectives on innovation. Brian has a day job, which is global evangelist for innovation at Salesforce, and he has a remarkable network, a remarkable intellectual reach, and a remarkable track record of accomplishment, which begins before we really all perceive digital as being a significant item on the landscape. And so to be someone who's made connections between the digital domain and marketing and community building and innovation and social media and organizational transformation is to know Brian. And I want to point out that 3 hours ago, if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 hours ago, Brian dropped his latest virtual article in the Wall Street Journal, of all places, on 10 future big deal developments in the world of technology, which was a very, very good read, Brian. So keep it up. You know, we're all trying to find the edge, and you are out there, further along than most.
Thank you, John. It was a bit of a wonderful surprise to be invited to contribute that. I wish the original version of that article published because it included evidence to those 10 events that I think are important. You can't just cite trends and look at the future, you want to substantiate it with why you believe these are the trends and why they're going to be important 10 years from now. And that, of course, was cut for the sake of making, as they used to say in the business, column inches. And so, with that said, John, why don't I turn it over to you to introduce our first guest? But before I do that, David, thank you very much for those messages, and we'll make sure to give those to John next week as well. And Jacob, yes, that is, you know what, that's gonna be my redo. Champagne this weekend, absolutely. For those who know me, that they know that is the sweet nectar of life for me. So, John, over to you.
Well, it's a pleasure to introduce Abby Falik, who is the founder and CEO of Global Citizen Year, which I'm sure we're all going to want to learn more about. But what's particularly interesting, I think, is that she's one of few people who stands at the edge of education and its evolving and ever-changing landscape. I think education, we learned this in the pandemic, is ripe for disruption. It's being disrupted on many fronts, but sometimes it's very hard to get the overall complexion of the landscape. She expresses her thought leadership in many different gatherings and vehicles, mainstream publications like the New York Times and NPR, and is an active participant in Aspen Ideas Festival and the Fast Company Innovation Fest. I actually didn't know that Fast Company had an Innovation Fest, so I've learned something quite piquant already. I remember when Fast Company was a pile of paper on Alan Weber's kitchen table, and we were talking about what Fast Company should be and how fast, and whether it should be a company. So how times have changed. So Abby, welcome to Intersections.
Thanks, John and Brian. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So maybe just in terms of the interest of getting some meat and potatoes out on the table, what is Global Citizen Year, and what does your dashboard look like? What are you into these days?
So Global Citizen Year is on a mission to reimagine a life stage, the transition out of high school into young adulthood for young people worldwide. And we believe that the world is facing an unprecedented crisis of leadership, and that our current educational paradigm is not up to the task of seeding a critical mass of new leaders, a pipeline that's more empathetic, globally oriented, social impact minded, representative of global diversity. And so we work with companies, colleges, community partners around the world to re-engineer this life stage so that ultimately we are ensuring that the future looks very different from the present.
That is so interesting, and I'd love to unpack it a little bit more. So I think we'd all agree that the landscape is disordered, but what specifically do you see as being the leadership issue, the leadership gap, and what is Global Citizen Year, and why is it a year? But why is your organization able to kind of fill that gap in?
So when we look at what's happening in K-12 education, there is this high stakes game to get into college, which is essentially what the system is now oriented around.
I'm right in the middle of this, so I know.
Are you? How old are yours?
I have an 11th grader.
Okay, so you know it very well. And I think that, we're valuing conformity and box checking over risk taking or exploring your authentic passions because you're afraid of messing up and what that might then mean about your ability to get into a famous college. I call them famous colleges, not just, selective colleges, because what they're best known for is being so famous. So I think we're just ripe, and the pandemic has absolutely created this Arundhati Roy wrote about it as a portal, a transition from one era of history to the next. And we're questioning everything, our systems and our institutions. And there's, clearly a disruption that's been accelerated as we think about higher education. Is it worth it? What do you learn? Do employers value those skills in the first place? And so the key insight for us is that the power skills of the future, we've started calling them the real 21st century skills, REAL, an acronym for what we believe is most important for our next gen leaders to learn, but can't be learned in a classroom alone. So that's R for resilience, E for empathy, A for agency, and L for leadership. But we define leadership not as an arrival point or a title or a position or salary. Leadership is a practice. It is a lifelong practice that begins as soon as you know your own power to drive, impact, and influence wherever you sit.
So how would you define leadership, since it's another one of these suitcase words that has lots and lots of different opinions and definitions associated with it?
It sure does. And, for us, leadership, again, we anchor on this notion that it is not an arrival point or a place that you sort of pause and say, now I'm a leader. It is an orientation around practicing a core set of things: curiosity before judgment, building empathy by crossing lines of difference, having the courage to do hard things, knowing your convictions and aligning your life with them.
So in that sense, aren't we all leaders, or don't we all have to develop leadership skills? I mean, the conventional idea of leadership is that there are leaders and then there are followers. And,
Yeah.
if you're a leader, you sit in the C-suite somewhere, or, in Congress, and God help us. And then everyone else is kind of not a leader. But I mean, it's almost, I think, points to the need for new language in a way, because leadership, like innovation or, whatever, creativity, are really overused words. You're kind of describing, if I understand what you're saying correctly, a mindset and a set of skills that everyone needs. So we all need to be, by your definition, we all need to be leaders.
And I think we all need an orientation to recognize that the things we say, the things we do, the votes we take, the places we invest our time and attention and resources have a ripple of impact beyond ourselves. And regardless of your position in society or whatever power or privilege you do or don't have, we all have a responsibility to see the impact we're having on other people's lives. And so our approach is to start young, to work with young people, particularly as they've come off this treadmill, this hamster wheel of the K-12 educational paradigm, and give them an opportunity to step back and reflect on who they are and who they want to become in a world that desperately needs all of us to tap our power to drive change.
I wonder, as we're talking, how dockable or adaptable what you're offering is to environments where they may not have K-12 education at all, so kids in refugee camps, or, in third world or in indigent environments. And then how you kind of reconcile what sounds a little bit like a North American paradigm of, our schools don't work and colleges are a rat race. And, we have to get them through that portal. I love that description. How translatable is it to other, either environments where there is no K-12 or no college transition, or environments where the game board is very different, like in Germany or in England, you basically have to decide who you are much earlier, and, you're tracked into different lanes, so that even the idea of a liberal arts education where people are encouraged to know themselves better it would be considered either a luxury or kind of a curiosity.
No question. And I think in that sense, actually, John, in many ways, the US is ahead of other countries in creating more holistic pathways. So I was just quite critical of our current paradigm. But when you look to many of the countries where our students come from around the world, their high school experiences are far more regimented, even more focused on teaching to tests that robots can already pass. There's a sort of premium on rote memorization and regurgitation. And I'm a believer that what we want to invest in for our own kids needs to be made accessible for all kids. We're living in a world that is globally interconnected, where, again, the robots and the AI can already do many of the intellectual tasks that our schools are still oriented around. And so in order to prepare young people to thrive, they need these real skills. How do you become an agent of your own learning? An entrepreneurial learner? The jobs that you'll be exposed to haven't been created yet. And in fact, you're going to be most employable if you can figure out how to connect the dots on your own. So I think it's tricky to suggest that what might make sense in a US context makes less sense elsewhere. I would actually venture to say it's even more important that we're thinking about this life stage universally as the moment when young people have the maturity to leave home, but they haven't yet fixed their values and identity. And that's where we can intervene to redirect them toward the kind of work that matters most in the world.
So how are you creating reach? How are you getting this out there to a critical mass of young people? What's the distribution strategy?
So we work with educators and nominators and colleges and governments around the world who are helping us identify really exceptional young people, exceptional defined not by test scores or grades, which we don't look at in our admissions process. We're looking for a spark of potential for young people who know there's more to learn about themselves in the world than what they've been exposed to in the classroom. So we have nominators who help. We work in partnership with others who are already working with young people. And then technology plays a huge role in this. So whether it's our past participants through word of mouth, spreading the word to their peers, or us just meeting Gen Z where they already are, which is online, we've been able to identify really extraordinary young people from all corners of our globe.
So how does online play into this? Do you have an online platform? I mean, forgive my ignorance, or do you leverage other online environments? I mean, are you a presence on TikTok? I mean, what are you
Yeah. So we're doing our best to be ahead of the curve, and it's not me on TikTok, but it is our alums and our team really being creative about, again, meeting Gen Z where they are and matching their idealism, their disillusionment with the state of the world, their frustration with the current generation of leaders, their determination to get in the arena, but their need to find their people and to find their power. And that's where we come in. So we tailor our messaging to attract them into a cohort of emerging leaders from around the world and help give them the skills and perspectives and networks that they'll need to be change makers. So that's the distribution. And we offer our training and curriculum and coaching now virtually. So in COVID times, we've reoriented around what we're calling Global Citizen Year Academy. So the earlier version of our work was an immersive fellowship where we would identify and select and train a cohort of emerging leaders, primarily from the US, to then spend the equivalent of a school year living and working in communities alongside the global majority in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And in the time of global pandemic, clearly wouldn't be responsible or appropriate to send kids around the world. So we reoriented a year and a half ago to launch what's become Global Citizen Year Academy, which is a new pathway for taking a Global Citizen Year, and it happens virtually. And we've been able to open the aperture of enrollment so that students from 100 countries have now joined us to go through a course and curriculum around learning themselves, learning about the world, learning how to have an impact at the intersection. They're paired with coaches. They build cohort and community that becomes really a foundation for their leadership for the rest of their lives.
So I'm going to toss it over to Brian in just a second. I just wonder, as a sidebar, do you address some of the mental health and wellness and well-being issues that are so endemic to the Gen Z experience right now?
Yes, and yes. And we do it both explicitly and then more broadly. So explicitly recognizing that so many young people have, we've got these digital natives who've grown up in a context of having an experience, and the expectation is that you then share it and your self-worth somehow is hitched to whether people like it or not. But there's this thinning of our presentation of ourselves in the world, which to me drives even greater urgency around what we do, which is getting you out of that context, sometimes unplugged for a period from social media, to figure out who you are and who you want to be outside of the context of this thinned out performative identity. So that's the context where so many students find us and feel really hungry for a more authentic connection with peers from around the world that has more nuance and dimensionality than your Instagram or TikTok profile. So that's a key piece of what we do. And then the other thing I would say, and we track these outcomes very closely. We work with teams at Harvard on our research and monitoring and evaluation, but we're looking at development of resilience as it relates to sense of self, sense of ability to take initiative, self-view, well-being, and sense of purpose. And all of those things help put your life in a broader global context, which again is a huge contributor to our sense of self. When we feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves, it makes the waves feel like they're part of an ocean and potentially a little bit less overwhelming and paralyzing.
Sounds great. Well, at some point, I'd love to share the leadership framework I cooked up over the pandemic to see if it aligns with your.
I'd be delighted to see it. Send it over, please. Great.
But thank you. But in the meantime, let me pass you over to the eminent Brian Solis for part 2 of the interview.
Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
thank you, John. I think that would actually be a great episode, actually,
What's
your
that?
framework. And
talking, my framework, or
yeah,
the
absolutely.
6 intelligences is what the framework is called.
Yeah, in fact, I wrote that down right here, the 6 intelligences, as we were talking, as an idea to have for us a conversation around your work as well. So let's schedule you on the show, John.
I think you got me already.
Let's jump in, Abby, because we have our next guest is already here, and I want to pack in about half an hour's worth of questions in 7 minutes. Dale Gonzalez asks a question that has actually come up from also the former CEO of LinkedIn, which is there is an incredible gap, a widening gap between the jobs of tomorrow and what kids are learning in university. And Dale's question was, are you tracking where these degrees, these in-demand degrees, are going? Where let's just say certain degrees are waning, and prepping these kids at a critical moment in their lives for an alternate future than they might have spent the last 17 years preparing for.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing these signals clearly in the corporate sector. So Google, Salesforce, LinkedIn don't require a college degree, and they are providing alternative paths into really tremendous jobs where you can take a set of Google online courses that roll into what is they then view as equivalent of a 4-year college degree. Our perspective on this is that if we leave the educational disruption to market forces alone, we're going to thin down to this least common denominator of training hard skills that are relatively straightforward to train on, easy to measure the outputs on the other side. But what then is lost are all of the other things that are not soft skills. We call them power skills, the real skills, as we talked about earlier, that employers absolutely value and will depend on in building resilient and innovative institutions for the future. So we just need to step back and say, if we were to recreate this from scratch, it would look nothing like the 4-year college experience. And I am totally convinced that my young boys who are 5 and 6 will not go to 4-year college in the traditional sense.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating conversation, because I could tell you that I have a 9 and a 5-year-old, and I feel the same way.
Brian, you froze for a second.
Am I still here?
Now you might want to rewind about 5 to 10 seconds because
okay.
Your question got cut off.
Thank you for that. Let's see if how's my signal doing? Looking good. Well, Abby, what I was going to say was, just to be brutally honest, is that my 9 and 5-year-old, I feel the same way. If I had to groom them for the jobs of the future, I would be paying attention to the jobs of the future and the skill sets needed to get there. But I can tell you that my significant other would demand a traditional classical education to prepare for that future, which will be interesting, to say the least. This coming from someone who dropped out of college to start a couple of companies, which I must say was a degree in of itself.
Absolutely.
But to your point around power skills, I'm going to see if I can share this here with the audience. This is a report that we just came out with recently on the future of work. And as you could see, or maybe can't see, some of the biggest skills here are soft, or what you call power, or others call human skills. But there are all definitely things that most did not learn in school. Adaptability, collaboration, resilience, creativity, data analysis, empathy, critical thinking, data science, inclusion. The World Economic Forum also has a version of this that is almost identical. Resilience is on that list, and leadership is on their list as well, which is on yours. Creativity is on their list, and these are all things. If you take the words of Sir Ken Robinson, were sort of taken away from us in the younger ages. of where we expressed other sides of our brain. So what I was hearing from you, which was really interesting, was sort of like this Y Combinator for human beings. And for those who aren't familiar with Y Combinator, it's an accelerator, one of the original accelerators in Silicon Valley that has given birth to basically all of the companies that you know of, most notably that I was just talking about, which is Airbnb. And that program helps entrepreneurs understand how to take their idea and make it a business and make it a game-changing business. I'd love to hear from you what you feel gets in the way of accelerating that development for a young adult, so that we can start to deal with those realities head on. Is it parents? Is it educators? Is it a system? And how do we peel that banana so that we can really start to get to the heart of the matter?
I mean, we're up against a lot of inertia, the way we used to do things, and a race to get back to, quote, normal in schooling and education. A system, as we've talked about, that is oriented around a very narrow set of measurable learning outcomes that are quite outdated for what the world needs most. We're also up against the forces of social media that are hijacking our attention and preventing us from developing that agency and sense of individuality and lived identity in the world. And so I think the opportunity is to use those platforms to put a call out to a generation that says, now's your moment. Don't just file along like an excellent sheep to, the aspirational jobs had become optimizing ad clicks for big companies. I mean, that is just not what the world needs right now. These challenges we're facing, our climate crisis, stopping the next pandemic, racial injustice, inequity worldwide, none of these can be solved using the same mentality or the same sort of narrow set of players as in the past. And so we need young people to get in the arena and prepare themselves to be the kind of cross-sector athletes, global thinkers, empathetic and courageous leaders that our world needs now.
So inspiring, Abby. Barry, I know you're backstage. Hold on. I got to ask one more question. There is another sort of unspoken or say underappreciated thing that's happening with our youth, which is that they're being programmed by those who, let's just say, don't have their best intentions in mind. If anybody spends time on TikTok, it's incredible the number of conspiracy theories spread by teenagers that are believed and are only further propagating. I do want to call attention to those who are maybe not paying attention to this, but it is a big deal because it is changing the trajectory of their future simply by taking over their mind in ways that are actually limiting. And there's a really wonderful movement that I think we need to maybe talk about more as part of your leadership program. This is a story in the New York Times by a friend of mine, Taylor Lawrence, whom we will have on this show at some point, that is profiling a conspiracy theory that a young 23-year-old gentleman launched as a conspiracy theory called birds aren't real, that birds are drones that recharge when they sit on power lines, and that he has been able to essentially convince people all around the world that this is real. But his point was that it was an awakening opportunity to show just how bad things are in a state of disinformation, and what we need to do about it by calling attention to this. So I'd be curious that if tomorrow's leaders are blindsided by these detours, what role can you play, I think, in helping where it doesn't have to be so extreme, like driving around in a van talking about how birds aren't real, so that we could bring people back to the center of what really matters, not this what we see on the news, but essentially what's really happening to their own future that they are going to need to play a role in.
Yeah. I mean, there are forces at play that are trying to distract and splinter and drive division. And I think the only chance of actually saving ourselves is helping young people step out of the context and to find their people, to find their power, to find their purpose, and to find their agency, to be the ones in the driver's seat of where they place their attention and their beliefs. I think of it as teaching them to see clearly, which I am concerned is something that we are not focused on in a world of constant distraction and distortion. And so what does it look like to come back to, what is really here? And we have methods for doing that. And once you've had the experience that reality is juicier than any of the distractions or the virtual reality that you might enter, you can't unsee that, and you can't actually want anything more of what's here in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. I have big hopes on Web3 and transparency and trustless networks to sort of help us get away from chasing these fiefdoms or factions and chasing clout and chasing likes and really getting back to the heart of the matter. So Abby, John, and I, we wish you all the luck. We need it, and we'd love to hear progress. And Abby, if your group does start publishing those types of reports that show sort of state of where jobs are going, skills and demand, contrary to the popular courses or majors that are in play, we'll help spread the word for you.
Great. Thank you both. Delight to be here.
Thank you, Abby. Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, I could just go on this as a parent, and as you're a parent. I mean, this is, I think about this all the time. And so with that, our next guest is backstage, Christy. Oh my gosh, I miss you, Christy. Thank you for the happy birthday wishes. We'll have to catch up very, very soon. And David, thank you for your comment there. Yes, we need to help them see through the noise and also help them see that it is noise. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. So with that said, I'm going to just give a quick, since I'm hitting all these buttons, a quick introduction to Barry so that I can then click the button that brings him up, which I'm really excited because I'm spending a lot of time, John, as you saw in the Wall Street Journal, thinking a lot about future technologies and how we can help accelerate those future technologies so that they don't just become these ideas, but that they become actual transformative experiences that change the world in a better direction. And so Barry Hoffman is the Chief Strategy Officer of Zero Light. And I'll let him tell you all about Zero Light. But personally, this is a technology that I've been fascinated by. My team, Natalia and Aaron on the commerce side at Salesforce, we're really looking at ways of reimagining commerce to be immersive, to be experiential, rather than the experience that you have today as a customer, saying basically a digital catalog of a analog based paper format, where you have things that are much more dynamic, immersive, things that you could explore. And so, Barry, welcome to Intersections.
Right, welcome.
Hey, Barry.
Hey, so I think you're coming in from Silicon Valley, that's fantastic. Los Gatos specifically, because that's just a beautiful city. So Barry, tell us about Zero Light and what you're working on and the inspiration behind it, and we'll jump into questions.
Yeah, we'll do that definitely. Can I first congratulate you on the former speaker? What an amazing woman. I was just following it a little bit, of course, and just the concept of how education needs to transform. It's such a major topic, and while I was listening to that, my mind was already converging on many things. But let me introduce myself a little bit and Zero Light, and probably it comes back in our talk a little bit as well. Name's Barry Hoffman, of course. My background has been primarily 23 years ago, I started in what's nowadays called data science. So back in the days, we were building massive data warehouses, business intelligence stuff. And we were actually combining all the data of the world into what nowadays is being seen as what do you do with the data? Why are you doing the things with the data? And the funny thing is, already in 1998, during the time I was at IBM, we were having specific committees to actually discuss what's actually allowed to do with the data instead of just doing stuff that you can do. So there's a whole thinking behind it. After that, I went into telecommunications, where I actually was the product owner of most of the platforms. You know, the CRM platforms coming in, things like Salesforce, the data, the customer insight platforms, the geo-marketing platforms, where all these things came together and saying, like, how can you help your customers? How can you make them decisions? How can you help your internal customers as well to actually make better decision making? At that time, I thought, like, it's nice, but it's also a bit industrial. It's triggers and those kind of things. And I was always like fascinated by the world of computer games and like being able to build like virtual worlds, you know, like, and yes, of course, you can get lost in those worlds, but then again, they can also become an extension of your mind if you do it the right way. And it can become like a playful area where people can actually create things and build things, you know, like look at Roblox, look at all those kind of like platforms, you know, like where children can actually have like their extensions and build their things. I did that up towards like 2012, where I entered a company called like Zero Light, which was already in its infancy state. We were actually building race games back then. We were involved in almost, well, I would say like 75% of any race game ever built, you know, like where you have like moving objects and you go behind the steering wheel and you have to feel like there is like a sense of speed, a sense of belonging in that car. And how do you actually transfer that real life feeling into something that is virtual? And at one point we saw that the market was changing. It became like more mobile games. It became more like click, hit a few buttons and you get your reward. And we felt as a company, we were never that kind of gaming company. We actually tried to create something that was a longer term experience, was creating something that felt more connected. So we stepped at that point out of the games industry and we started using our technology to start building what you would now call maybe a virtual showroom, or something that is showing like big CG cars on screens, and that gave people the feeling what they looked at could actually be real or uber real, you know, like it's almost like it's better than real, you know, like you have a car in a nice environment, the reflections and everything are in an environment that's not a greasy lot with tarmac, but it's actually a nice beach and those kind of things. And slowly we transferred that technology from just a big screen with a big PC behind it to turn it into the cloud. And in comes people like your team, of course, where you say, like, it's nice that you can do the visualization, but what's the affordance around it that you allow to do things with, you know, like what's, you know, like, because like if you interact with that world, it's things like the Commerce Cloud that allows you to interact with that world. And what we basically do is we accelerate that visualization. And what you see here is static pictures, but if you go to a website like lucidmotors.com, where you can interact with the configurator, or you go to Volkswagen's websites, you know, like you can see that the experience today is much more immersive than they had like a couple of years ago. And the whole reason because of that is that they transferred from like having a dinky toy car on a white background where you couldn't zoom in and you could say, oh, that looks like a car, but you could actually go and you could go deeper into that car, zoom in. Again, the word affordance is great because you can zoom in, you can almost interact with objects. And because of that, people started making more realistic like decisions on buying, on owning that type of vehicle without even having to go to a lot. Incomes now this year, where after the whole COVID thing, but even this year with the whole chip shortage, that we actually don't even have cars on the lots, because like you can drive all across America at the moment and you can look at the lots and the cars that you see standing there. I can tell you 100% that 50% of the car you see standing there don't have chips in there. They're basically dummy cars standing there next to a bunch of other cars. And you can go there and you say, hey, I want that car. And they say, well, you have to wait X time before you're going to get it. So I've said to some of my partners as well, how are we going to digitally fill up those lots that are now empty so that people can have their choice? So it's a very focused approach. What we have, of course, at this moment, unfortunately, we're not saving the world in this case. I think what we do for good is basically that we allow people to start making decisions based on digital components. So you don't need to fill up like things with like real things. You don't have to travel there. You can make your decision from your backyard and basically saying, this is what I want. And mostly we work in what you saw, like BRP is like power sports, you know, like they do the sea-doos, ski-doos, all those beautiful things you use on water and in the snow, you know, like at the same time, we also do like major brands like Volkswagen, Mitsubishi, Nissan, the new Ariya, We do Lucid Motors, like there's a lot of like other EVs coming through our partners actually. So that's pretty cool. So that's in a very long nutshell, I would say, what we are doing, and maybe a little bit of an introduction my end.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's a wonderful space to be in. I think you've actually set the stage quite nicely in that COVID has accelerated certain technologies that might not have otherwise seen the light of day, at least in the mainstream, for a few years. And the reality is that augmented reality, in one way, has accelerated its adoption. And if we just look at just practical B2C applications where, you could project a shoe or a watch onto your desk or onto your wrist, that type of adoption has just accelerated dramatically over the last years. But the thing that's also interesting about that is that it literally brings to life a static product that I think has held e-commerce back, to be honest, because it's 2021 and we're having e-commerce experiences that are basically still 1997. And now what we saw was the business benefit of augmented reality, where consumers were stuck at home. They did want to see more about that product, but the business impact was that augmented reality helped, it radically accelerate or push up conversions. So we saw more sales because of AR, and then we saw less returns because people were more confident in the purchases that they were making. So that sounds like a pretty solid business case to me. So you're now, working in far more experiential products and services where the detail, where the immersion become critical, that 61% of customers are going to be more digital after the pandemic than they were before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So this sets the stage, I think, for businesses to start to reimagine experiences, commerce, how we go to market and how we display products to that digital first customer. But I really want to hear also from you, Barry, is where do you see the challenge in bringing this type of technology more to the mainstream? And by mainstream, I mean, luxury, right? Luxury is any type of product, from a car to a bag to a hotel or a destination. So those to me are the types of things that we'd want to experience, like Total Recall before science fiction, but two, also maybe imagine entirely new worlds together that can be built as a result of this concept and maybe this democratization of conceptualization. So would love to hear your thoughts on that, Barry.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's funny, like we're so much in the infancy states of where the world, which is currently flat, we live on a flat world, like what we always said is the world is round. Yes, in reality, the world is round, but in digital, the world is still flat. If you look at this page, what you're just showing, that's a flat page, like it's a picture, it's a bunch of pictures. It's almost like this one, what we did was like basically Mickey Mouse 1930, because like you have a range of pictures where you go and you have a movie, but we did that because like the technology is still quite expensive to run GPUs. So that means, we need to evolve those GPUs further, like if you take this one, for instance, where we took the car and we actually built something for that company. They had like maybe massive books if you went into an agency, and then those massive books in those agencies.
In order to invite fans and enthusiasts.
You might want to. And then they would use those massive books to create a product that has 18,000 parts. And that 18,000 parts can all uniquely be changed to become a unique product, like a Pagani is a work of art, basically, But like, if you go from either Pagani all the way down to for instance, like more mass market cars, like a Volkswagen ID4, in the end, there's still thousands or thousands of parts. What the big challenge is like the data models behind those thousands of parts need to come together in a way that it's not only for the audience the trustworthy feel that that's the car that they want to see, but it's also for the engineers and the heads of designs and the heads of marketing to say, I trust this CGI to actually be the right type of car in every combination. Some of those cars have billions of combinations. So what you see today is that sometimes they only show 3, 4, 5 combinations because it has to go through manual checks for every bit and every part. And what we've done in the past is what we said is like we take the data model of the car, We take every material, we take every variant of that, and we make certain that that model is correct. And once the model is correct, every output will be correct as well. So you don't have to check the images, the movies, the AR models, which takes forever. Once you agree on the model, then the output is good. And basically what that allowed to do was that everybody working with that model, like let's say, take for instance a Volkswagen, where lots of different markers are using a productivity platform of ours called Spotlight, where they can create images and videos. Even the agencies and third parties working with them can make use of that same platform. And they actually output it in a way without having to have sign-off, because that sign-off already happened. So you put a lot of the effort at the start instead of at the end. And one of our board members was explaining that about the film world as well, like where he says, where it used to be post-production, where all the virtual effects and everything happened at the end. Now it happens much more in pre-production. And you see it with us as well. Once we do the pre-production right, and you say, what do we agree upon what the virtual world needs to look like? What's the environment you want to place it in? Then you can give basically a lot more total freedom to creators to create output of that. And I almost explain it in a way like for people, like with data as well, people can be forever busy with, for instance, filling Excel sheets, data entry. And it takes up 80% of their time. And in the end, they have 20% of their time left to do data analysis, which is one of those things which is on your report as well, what you were just showing, one of those skill sets. But if you're already being 80% busy with dummy work, tedious dumb work, that means you don't have time and headspace left to actually do the real job, which means, what are we talking about? What is the story we're trying to tell? What's the message we're trying to convey? What's the insight I want to take out of it? So what we're doing is actually, and what I believe that is, and I'm going now maybe very high level, is what the function of any AI in the world should be, whether it's the visualization that we create, which is doing a lot of things automated. It should augment what humans are doing in a way that the tedious work, the simplistic work, the sort of Karate Kid, like wax on, wax off, and those kind of thing, is being done by computers once you've done it 1 or 2 times, and then the rest can be 80% of your time can be spent on what's the story I want to tell, what's the beauty I want to create, what's the art I want to create, what's those kind of things. Hopefully it all makes sense. I make a long story out of a short question.
That definitely all makes sense. We have a question as well from David. Do you foresee Zero Light getting involved in forecasting models, helping manufacturers take, say, the back end of what features and parts are potential or popular across the board in order to sort of feed them that service on demand?
I think it's an amazing question. Like what we see a lot is, like at the moment, let's call it the configurator, like people want to have personalized output. So there's a configurator, and through the configurator, you can say what colors you like, what kind of wheels do you like, even up to what kind of battery packs you like. Because one of the things we're now starting to show is like the drivetrain of cars and those kind of things as well. It's like, once you make those choices are still your wish, but they're not yet real. And almost every OEM we work with or where we run into is that they say what the configurator shows today is more like a wish, and then we have to come back whether we can actually produce that result for them within a time period. And what everybody is working towards is saying, once we show the variant that the customer wants, they should hit a button and say, this is the time it takes for you to get that product coming out of the factory, or coming out of an inventory, or coming out of a bigger warehouse or a lot somewhere near you, so that everybody can make like a conscious decision about the fact, when will you receive that thing? To be honest, David, it's a great question. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's definitely not happening now. I think there's a couple of OEMs who have a lot more in place, like BRP as an amazing system in place. But this is definitely the direction where it's going to. And what we help with is basically not so much only with the sort of end choices that people made, because like you can already do that. That's basically called a transaction, and a transaction can be done in any database. But it's also the way how people review the car. Like, for instance, we have several stages in which people review cars. For instance, with with Lucid, people go through a configurator and that's minutes, and it's already double the amount of what a regular configurator gets, and it's got double the amount of reservations of what a normal configurator gets. But once they go into a product called Lucid Studio Live, which is a hybrid, sort of like where a salesperson sits on the call with you, going basically as co-presence through the same world. People sit for 46 minutes and they actually walk through this, and they do that at the same time. And that's kind of, we already see that the choices they make are not necessarily always the end transaction, but is also the stuff that they want to work up towards, the thing they consider as well. So there's a lot of consideration data, which I think can help with that forecasting as well. Yeah.
Man, that's actually that's a great example. So probably have to take a part two to that conversation because that I kind of just recently went through that and was appalled at how mediocre, if not just sort of challenging experiences still are to this day. So, but with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague John to get in some questions I'm sure he has plenty of.
Well, I'd like to ask a couple of meat and potatoes questions, kind of coming back from the detail out to the wide angle. What other categories of products have you considered as potential next markets? Because this is a technology that's probably going to be looking for other opportunities. What can you tell us about what you've been thinking about since you're involved in crafting the strategy?
It's, again, great question. Is when we started out, we did this amazing project for Audi where we were going to get VR in every showroom. The need started in 2013. They were very early on in Oculus before even Facebook bought Oculus. They wanted to have like a headset in every showroom. So we built that together with them, and then actually it had very good results. The only thing was like, how do you upkeep like PCs in your showrooms? How do you keep all those things going? I like that kind of stuff. Like, so at the same time when we were doing that, almost the VR world exploded. I think you can remember, 2013, 2014, 2015, it was going to be the new thing. And that was like when it was like on the peak of inflation, and then it dropped into this trough of disillusionment. And now we're thankfully getting back up to that plateau, where it's going to grow. I'm certain of that is. And at that time, we were looking at airplanes. I think one of the biggest air company in the world, we did like the first class, and where people could combine chairs and could find out what would be the next chair, but all those things were not so much a thing that a platform could support, but they were all sort of like custom built experiences. Mm-hmm. And that's great, but we are not in the business of custom built experiences because that doesn't really accelerate.
Doesn't scale.
At scale, yeah. So what we were looking at is that's why we went back to automotive, because even houses, real estate, I talked with every real estate big shot in the US, through some of the accelerators we took part in, and they came over and said, oh, we want this as well. And I said, like, how standardized is your real estate? And apart from some big living towers, sorry for my bad English, it's like none of those are standardized. So that means every piece of data model needs to be custom built, needs to be custom adjusted. Mm-hmm. Incomes, a range of years, we did a lot more automotive. We slowly went into power sports with BRP. So that means you can see that the cars from doing like Paganis, Lamborghinis, very high-end products, that there's enough margin to actually build a high-end digital experience on top of the sales price. We went down like to a lower degree, and now you're getting into the range of the $10,000 kind of products. And what you slowly see is that yes, the GPU prices are going down. Our platform is more standardized, and at the same time, we found a way to ingest more data models than before. We used to have a couple of data models, and now we can virtually ingest every data model. And that means we can now start to explode. So we've done some first tests where we have bicycles, we had like vacuum cleaners in, we had like, and especially with AR becoming such a spatial kind of like tool, even though it's just, in most use cases, you see, can I look how my car looks like in front of my house? Like that kind of stuff. Or can I see whether this vacuum cleaner fits in this corner where I always put my vacuum cleaner, like those kind of things. it's enough, you know, like, or does this bike actually fit in my hallway, you know, and isn't it going to clog up, you know, like that's fine. And because we have made a way of importing those data models much faster, we can now look at different industries, because, you know, like, we don't have to ask them
Right.
everything which they cannot afford. Yeah. So
the other question I wanted to ask before we run out of time here is, what are your thoughts about your technology in relation to training? Well, training at one extreme, but also replacing the you know, the user manual. So, you know, one of the problems that you know, I've had when I don't own a car anymore, by the way, so this is kind of like a very abstract conversation for me. But when I did own a car, I would never read. I would assume I didn't have to read the manual because I'm a Apple bigot, and then I would realize I had to read the manual, and then I didn't want to read the manual. And you have the ability to demonstrate functionality, like, you know, how to drive the car skillfully. You know, how does braking work, and regenerative braking, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So what are your thoughts about the learning part for your tech, you know, your stuff?
yeah, no, that's super. Like, what we as a company always did, we you know, like, we're a small company with 160 people, you know, like, with a lot of like engineers in there. So we always said, like, we need to focus, you know, like, if you're head of strategy, you need to find where's your focus. Otherwise, I would be a bad head of strategy, and we
Right.
wouldn't have like a direction. But at the same time, we realize is that once you have that data model set up and built and ready to ingest into people's systems, you know, and then link it up to things like Salesforce Commerce Cloud, you know, like, for instance, you know, like, they want to do more with that. And what you say is absolutely right. After we did the digital brochure, you know, if you think about a manual is a bigger brochure, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
the question though is, like, which team is going to do that? And what we do is, with the brochures, we often work with an agency of records that is actually creating the brochure, that does the copy and everything around it. Otherwise, we become responsible for the whole thing. That's the same with the configurator. We often work with the rules engine company. We often work with people doing the UI UX. We can sometimes do it completely if they have a turnkey result, or the first time we sometimes do it. So on the owner manual, we work together with some of the people that actually build those like manuals. And that's the same with training. What we have is, we have a very simple form, which is basically an API, you know, like, that allows people to tap into the library. And then it's basically, what kind of instructions do you give it to sort of like say, if you look at this car, open up the booth, zoom into the booth, show the booth, and show where the buttons are that you can lift this thing, show where the wheel is, you know, like, those kind of things you can create coming out of our platform. Visualization is a universal language of showing people what to do.
Right.
So if visualization can for 90% transform what a textual thing can do, I think that's a great new thing. What we've seen though is, when you start doing digital brochures, is we did everything digital, we didn't have any text in it, and then people started looking what the legal requirements are of a brochure. Then at the end of the page, we had, like, I think 4 or 5 pages that were filled with legal text that needed to be there because of legal requirements. But okay, you know, like, that's sort of the transformation where we're in. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's a fertile area, because if you can show, you know, there's an old adage in Hollywood, which is show, don't tell. And, you know, if you can show people how to use something instead of making them read a manual or telling them how to do it, I think you're much further ahead. So thank you, Barry. And with that, let me turn it back over to Brian to close us out.
Barry, thank you. Thank you for showing us a glimpse of what the future looks like happening today. This is fascinating, and we want you to keep us in the loop. And also, I'll keep up with you on what we're doing together back at Salesforce. But very much appreciate you making time for this. I'm suddenly now in the market for a new Pagani in my dreams. Barry,
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and happy holidays.
Yeah, thank you very much, and see you guys as well. Have a good
Cheers.
day.
Thanks, Barry.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, John, another action-packed episode. We have all kinds of Barry. If you could see, I don't know if you could see this, but there are some questions. If you don't mind coming back to the LinkedIn stream, if you don't have a link, I'll get you a link. But there are a lot of questions that people have, as we could see, that could use some answers, could use your help. This is really interesting. People are really talking about this. Barry, you struck a chord. Fantastic. Well, John, another episode, another week of just mind-blowing technologies and movements. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. We should point out to our audience that we're going to have a show next week, and then we're going to be off for a couple of weeks for the holidays. And then we'll be back with Aurora in the new year. So, get ready for Intersections 1 week from today on the 16th of December.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think we're using our Instagram so much anymore, but if you do want to catch previous episodes, which I honestly have to tell you that I don't think any of our episodes are out of date. I think they're all very much
evergreen.
Yeah, evergreen, very much many in vogue, very critical, some of these conversations. So please do tune in. We have them all listed here at Intersections Live. And with that said, we will see you next week. Thank you so much for being part of our show, being part of the community. And now I just have to find some buttons to click, and that will take us off air. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to our guests. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye, everyone.